painting from a photograph presents a few challenges. Hello, my name is Tim Wilmot, and in this video I want to cover some tips for painting from your photographs. I suppose the first thing to consider is copyright. If you're going to exhibit or sell your painting, it's a good idea to ensure you're using ideally your own material or get the written permission of the person who owns the image. Next challenge, certainly for me, is this photograph suitable for a watercolor painting? And in my opinion, a lot of the photographs I've taken aren't. They may be great photographs, but they would make a very poor painting because of the subject matter, or the complexity of the scene, or the composition, and so on. Anyway, so once you have selected your subject, then we need to think about what to leave in or leave out. Let me just zoom into this particular scene, more on this particular scene in a minute. But thinking about details you may want to include or leave out, trying to simplify the scene as well, and also the values that you've got also in the picture. So we've got some very light areas in the scene, some very dark areas. Think about the colors as well. Colors in a photograph may not be a true representation of what it was in real life. Nothing beats being out in the outdoors and painting plein air to see the true values, the true colors. But a photograph could distort those, and if you're painting from a printed image, then there'll be even more distortion. So you've got to be mindful of that. As I say, think about composition, things to leave in, things to leave out. Also, from a photograph, think about visually or manually cropping the scene, changing the actual dimensions of the image. So you could, for example, on this scene, we could go for a sort of portrait orientation dimension of a painting, or we may go slightly in like that and zoom in on a particular part of the scene. I think with this photograph in mind, the danger is that half of it is very dark. If I was to draw a line from top left to bottom right, practically everything here is very dark, and that might make for an uninteresting painting. It might be better to, as indeed I am, I'm going to focus on this area here, and then I need to think about what is the lighter area, what are the darker areas, and in watercolor, trying to get a contrast between those light areas and dark areas. So the scene is Minster. It's a little village called Minster Lovell on the River Windrush, which is actually just over there in the background. Can't see this in the photograph. And this is in Oxfordshire, the county of Oxfordshire in the UK. Quite a pretty village, sort of iconic English scene with these thatched cottages and roses and so on. But it could be anything. And I think it's a good example to choose. And I took loads of photographs when I walked up and down this lane here. Loads of photographs in different angles and different lighting. This is I think this is early in the morning, in the winter, so the light is really low, creating some nice shadows across the scene. So the light is coming from the top left, going right into the right, then creating some areas of light and obviously dark. But I think what I wanted to avoid is having all of this shadow, the shade here, and concentrate more up there. Now, just before I go on through this video. It's free to watch, but not free to produce. If you do like these videos, please support me via Patreon at www.patreon.com/Tim Wilmot. Every month or two, I set painting projects for my members up on Patreon, and for a small pledge, I give you a personal critique with some extra hints and tips. So for more details, please go to my Patreon site. You'll find the links in the description of this video. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel to get automatic notifications of new videos. It's probably the bell in the top right corner of your screen. So first decision is the composition, and I'm trying to visualize on my paper before I start putting in the outline drawing, the overall shapes and design and the layout of these buildings, and trying to, I think in this scene, as I said already, I'm going to zoom in and ignore the big shaded area that's sort of dominating my photograph in the lower left portion of the photograph. So I'm going to concentrate on looking down the road here, and those end cottages, the light hitting the right hand buildings and the right hand rooftops, and the light coming across the road as well. So that's the idea. Of course, first step is the outline drawing, and I'm starting with the major shape of that. It's actually I think it's a pub down in the bottom right hand corner, a pub and hotel down the bottom right hand corner there, and so just off center, and trying to get right the perspective. And I've already done a little bit of cross hatching on the windows in the roof there, just to get an idea of the darker areas of my picture, just so that I know when I'm painting, what I need to leave light and leave dark and paint around and so on. I'm using Saunders Waterford watercolor paper here. This is cold press, which is medium texture, not too rough, not too smooth. So it's got quite a nice bit of texture to the surface, and this is cotton-based paper, and ideal for watercolor painting. I think that's one of the most important things with watercolors, getting the right tools, getting the right equipment, and the paper is probably, for me, is the most important thing. So this is Saunders, really good watercolor paper, 300 grams in weight, and I don't pre-wet my paper. This is secured with a little bit of masking tape, which is easily peeled off at the end. So it is going to buckle a little bit, but I don't mind that. When it's all dry, it soon flattens out again. So, as I say, with this drawing, just trying to get the overall shapes right, the buildings, rooftops, perspective. Now, I've decided not to, because I've excluded all that big shaded area, I'm not going to have that very brightly lit cottage on the right hand side. I could have done, I could have made a feature of that, and I'd have had to have included all that, the shadow area, but it would have made, in my opinion, made for a less interesting scene. So I want to try and I'm zooming into that pub down the center, and just have one building up on the right hand side and a wall attached to that building. Now over to the left hand side there's a bit of roof coming out from something over on the left, and we've got quite a strong shape on the left hand side with the front of this building. So just getting in the rooftop there, down to the wall, and then getting the line of the street correct. So I'm going to include a couple of figures here. So just get the outline, the rough outline of them. They'll probably change a little bit when I start painting them. But just to get them right, get their placement right in the picture. And so there are a couple of figures in the photograph, but they're too far away. I'm bringing them just a little bit closer to us, and with a couple of figures I need to make sure they don't have the same appearance, they don't have the same stance or poise. I need to make them a little bit different, otherwise it will look a little bit too odd. Just emphasize the main lines of the shapes I'm going to be painting. And indicate a few windows, not all of them. That's the end of the street there, and then the edge, trying to get the edge of the road right, and then these shadows coming across the street, going over the hump of the grass there. I think there's a little sort of drainage ditch running in front of the cottages on the right. And that might be it for the drawing. So after the drawing is done, I'm happy with the drawing, and the drawing has to be as good as you can get it. Otherwise, if there's some imperfections in the drawing before you start painting, things go horribly wrong. You can't often pull back a painting in watercolor if you haven't got the plan right and you know where all the shapes are going to be. So second step is getting in the first wash, and I normally start with a sky. I'm using a mop brush here just because it holds a lot of water, and it's a big brush as well, so I can quickly go over the painting, and I try to use as big a brush as I can get away with compared to the size of the paper. So the sky will go in first, very quickly. Rarely will I go back into that sky. Once it's done, it's done. sometimes with watercolor, the more you tamper around with it, things can go horribly wrong. So it's a good idea to, when you're painting with watercolor, if you think you've made a mistake, just leave it and then wait a few minutes, wait till things have dried, wait till things have settled down, and then reevaluate the situation. Now, I'm going over, so with that sky, I went over the a lot of the shapes, which doesn't matter. I'm going to now go in with a slightly thicker paint, doing the buildings, and because the sky is of course still moist, I'm going to get some soft edges, which is another watercolor technique, trying to make sure that you've got lots of different edges, hard edges, soft edges. And when we're painting wet into wet, as I'm doing along the rooftops and here, we're going to get some soft edges. So all the way down, as I'm coming down, alternating the colors on my brush, so it's not too uniform. So that's a little bit of the background I'm doing there to the left of the central building. And then the road. I should point out my palette actually to you. So on the right, starting from the very top, I've got neutral tint, then burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, a bright red, which I think is Windsor red, then a light red, cadmium orange, and cadmium yellow, which I'm just using there. So I'm making up my own green, not the only green I've got in my palette is really viridian green, which I rarely use, but you can get some very nice green looking colors by making your own with any blue that you've got and any yellow that you've got. Just mix them together, see what comes out of it. Sometimes if you buy a green paint excuse me, and use that, well, especially if you use it neat out of the tube or out of the pan, using pans or tube, it doesn't look too natural in color. You're going to get, I think you're going to get a lot better looking greens by making up your own, as I say, obviously with a yellow and a blue. So we're going to let that dry just a little bit. But while the background is still moist, I'm now going to put in some of the background trees, and again we're painting sort of wet in wet. I have a smaller brush this time, and so the paint is a little bit thicker, less water to pigment combination excuse me, and now we're just getting in those background trees. As you can see, I'm getting a little bit of a soft edge across where it meets the sky, and with this brush, with the hairs splayed out a little bit, the point, I lost the point on this brush a long time ago. I'm going to get some interesting brush marks with this to indicate the background, and we don't want too much. We don't want to put too much detail into the background. It's way over there in the back. We can't really see too much detail, so it's got to be just quite loosely done, quickly done, almost like the sky before it. Now I'm following the edge of the rooftop of the pub round the chimney as best I can with this brush. And you can see those hairs don't have a really good edge to it at all. And with the side of the brush, and because the paper has got a little bit of a rough texture to it, I'm achieving some gaps by just dragging it over the paper. So these are going to be the trees over on the right hand side. Picking up any colour in the palette, and with the side of the brush we're going along the edges of these trees just to indicate, is giving the impression of the edges of the trees where you've got such very small fine twigs that would be impossible to paint them individually. So the best thing is to give the impression of those edges, which is what we're doing here. And maybe there could be a few dead leaves still hanging on in the trees there, so it's a little bit denser than the center of the canopy, the center of the tree. So up the top of the palette is generally where I mix my darks, and it's close to the neutral tint there and the burnt sienna. So this is a bit of a classic combination here, ultramarine blue and burnt sienna together. Quite a common combination used by lots of watercolor artists. In fact, I probably use more ultramarine blue and burnt sienna than any other paint. I'm regularly reordering those to replenish my palette. So it's getting a little bit darker towards the bottom of the background. And while the background is still quite moist, I can go back into it with some darker colour, and generally thicker in consistency. Always try and do that if you're going into an area that's damp, or still damp, certainly still moist. Make sure that the paint is thicker on your brush than what's on the paper. Otherwise you'll get some nasty results with cauliflowers and so on appearing in watercolor. What was happening when I added in that yellow ochre, it sort of created a nice shape. That could be where it's going to be a little tree there in the background and slightly darker behind that. So just emphasize that, and as the watercolor was, as the paint was settling, I could see these shapes appearing in front of me, and just trying to emphasize those edges a little bit. I think I need a little bit of extra darkness in the background trees, so while it's still just a little bit moist still, going back in with a darker color, which will also provide a bit more contrast on that roof on the right hand building, which I'm going to keep light, so give the impression of some bright light hitting that rooftop. So the next step, stage 3, really, after doing the initial wash, is to go in with the darks, which is suddenly hopefully going to transform the picture a little bit, so we can start to see the shapes of the buildings and shadows and so on. So I'll start with the building, this main building in the background, the pub. Get a nice dark colour, and with this the same brush that I was using for the foliage, but now I've tried to get as good an edge as I can. Now with these colours and these values, watercolor will very often dry lighter than as you see it now. So this might appear quite dark, but it will go a good bit lighter. So that's the thing you need to think about, is trying to compensate for that, things going lighter than when you first put them on the paper. Got to be a bit careful around the chimney. But you can see as soon as I, because I painted around the chimney, and as soon as I put that shadow on the side of the chimney, instantly it's appearing as a solid object. Now, when you're painting from a photograph, I'm constantly looking at the photograph for reference and just to check the values. Maybe on my first glance of the photograph, I'm now seeing some extra detail. I've got to be a bit careful not to, again, include too much detail. I'm trying to simplify the scene, or trying to aim for a loose style watercolor, but I will be constantly looking back at the photograph every minute or two for reference purposes, just to assist me and make sure I'm going down the right track. So the right hand side of that far building, and you can see already those first darks I put in, they're getting lighter already as the paint's drying. Now I'm just coming down to maybe a few shrubs and plants that are just catching the light. So I've just painted around those, done a little bit of negative painting around those just to then create the shapes of those shrubs. With a fairly good edge on this brush now, I could make those marks of the windows on this right hand building, and now the side of the building in shade. It doesn't matter that I just leave a few marks there, just makes for a more interesting texture, and maybe there's little things that are catching the light. Perhaps there's some plants growing up the side of the house there, just catching the light maybe. And then the chimney again. Chimney top, and I quite often use my fingers for blending colours while they're still wet, or also a little bit of lifting out, actually lifting the colour off of the paper just to make it a little bit lighter. So at the end of the painting I end up with some dirty fingertips, but it's just I just find it's quite a useful way, as I say, for blending and a bit of ad hoc lifting of colours. Now I'm going in quite dark here, just thinking about what I said earlier, trying to get a contrast between the light areas and the dark areas. So I've got a nice bit of dark now against the light of that roof, so giving a good range of values. So this is the sort of base of the background in a way, just finalizing that off, adding a bit of darkness to the trees and growth in the background there. The river Windrush is way over beyond that. Now there's this rooftop that I've just suggested there with a few tiles, and then the front of this building that's in shade. Because this is over on the left hand side, I don't want to put too much detail into this. The focal point should be going down the road and the building, the pub at the bottom of the road. That's going to be one of my focal points. So I don't want to put too much detail over on the left or over on the right, because it would detract from that focal point. So just keep it loose, keep it simple. When you're looking at the photograph, painting from a photograph, don't consider all the detail that's around the side of the painting, around the periphery. Concentrate on the central areas. Now I've got a sword brush here, or I could use a rigger brush for doing fine lines and the little twigs and branches and so on. So I put in, so that initial loose wash after the sky, I went in with a darker color, and we had some soft edges. That would have been the finer twigs. What I meant adding in now are the main tree trunks. And with this sword brush, it holds a lot of paint, and you get some nice variation in thicknesses of line as well. It's great for doing foliage also. Do this main tree in the middle in the background. Just a few lines to give the impression of the main trunks and branches, the thicker branches. Not too many, don't overdo it. And then over on the right, some lines there, just to complete that sort of little wood in the background. These are probably silver birch trees or something like that, quite tall and slender. And you can also, as well as for foliage, just use them for a little bit of architectural detail. Just anywhere where you need to produce some long, thin lines. Could be fence posts, wires, ropes. It's quite dark just behind the pub as well, so I've just added a bit more colour to that wall and the edge of this roof as well. Now back with my medium mop brush, getting the very dark shape of this building on the left hand side, which I'm not featuring much at all in this painting. It's just almost like a frame on the left hand side, but it just creates a slightly interesting shape with the eaves of the rooftop, and we just have basically a dark band coming down that left hand side, but leave a few little gaps here and there where the light might be catching, and the gap between this and that, the roof beyond it. So we'll do this first before then doing the shadows across the street. So that's going to be the wall down the left hand side. So shadows are a little bit bluer, and we'll try and make them quite light in value in the background, but coming a little bit darker in value towards us. So weaker at the back, maybe less water in that shadow color, and these shadows will be different in color as they go over the grass. I'm gonna, maybe not here, but closer towards us, I'm gonna make a dark green color going over the grass, going over the lawn, but these are going to be a cool blue, so darker in, stronger in consistency, as they come towards us, and dragging the brush across the road. I've got a rough edge, so again giving these different edges in watercolor. And a last shadow at the bottom. Very loosely done, and then I need to make up a darker green colour for the shadow going over the lawn. And this is where with the shape of these shadows we're giving a little bit of definition to the bank and the little drainage ditch beyond the bank, just in front of the houses on the right. And I'm splattering here. Just picked up some water. Bit of splattering just so it's not too neat and tidy and precise. Just add in a few more. It's adding another dimension to the painting with a few of those splatter marks. Lighter in the dark areas, darker in the light areas. Bit of dark shadow in this ditch. It's still a little bit moist on the left hand side, so I'm going in again with some darker colour on top. Now I need to add in some climbing plants up the side of the pub, sort of like a yellowy golden colour. And I'll just repeat that into a few other areas of the painting. I'm going to add in a few darker values now. So medium mop brush, ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, bit of neutral tint. Need some darkness at the base of that building, and create a little bit of form around some shrubs or something at the bottom of the building. Just a few darks in that creeping plant up the wall. I'm going to go in with a bit more detail now. So I've got a small synthetic round brush and making a dark colour. I'm going to add a bit of shadow to the pole on the left hand side. There's some kind of a box halfway down it, give a bit of definition to that. And then the lamp coming off the lamp post, that shall light itself. Just going around now, adding in just a few final bits and pieces before I put in the two figures. So I'm adding in a few tire marks there across the road. Just helps with the composition as well, so leading us into the composition. A few dark lines underneath the tiles. So use my finger again just because went in just a little bit too dark there, and I quickly lifted it off with the fingertips just before it dries. Could have used a brush if you don't want to dirty your fingers. The window just facing us, a few dot lines to around the outside of the window. Now, I don't want to overdo these dark lines, so I'm not doing a continuous line. It's sort of got a few gaps in it, lost and found, as they say. So quite a sort of loose technique. I'm adding just a few lines, just a few brush marks to this wall on the right hand side. A few verticals, a few horizontals, just to add a bit more interest over there. Now the side of the entrance porch just needs a bit darker. A few final pieces just here and there as I'm going around the painting. Just some final bits again on the left hand side with that, I think it's a wall in front of the cottage on the left. So, final step are some dark figures. Maybe walking into the scene. So I'm going back to my medium mop brush, and this has got to be quite dark and fairly thick as well. So ultramarine blue, burnt sienna, neutral tint, and then get a good edge on my brush. I can just about make out the outline of the pencil outline I had before, which I'll sort of loosely keep to. Starting off with a head, and then the body, now these figures need to blend in with the shadows, so we don't as such, we can't really see much detail in their legs or certainly their feet. So quite a hard edge at the top where their heads and top of their bodies are, but then we're going to get nice and soft as we come into the shadow going across the road. Now figure number 2, slightly different poise. I'm trying not to make this second figure identical to the first. Perhaps we'll have this figure, perhaps that's talking to the, just turning around and talking to the first figure. So head, and the body, and then the legs. So I'm using my fingers again to give a soft edge. just need to extend out the left-hand side of that figure. Adjust the head just a tiny bit. Now with a paper tissue, I'm just lifting off. I could have used my finger tips again, but a paper towel or a tissue is going to lift up a lot more and quicker. Just to, as I say, give a soft edge to those legs. And there we are, all done. Painting from a photograph. So here's the end painting side by side with my source photo. The focus of this watercolor tutorial is painting from a photograph, and just to summarize my thoughts on painting from a photograph. If you're not able to regularly go outdoors, then that's the only thing you've got, unless you've got a very vivid imagination. Then we have to resort to images that we have to give us some inspiration. And so I predominantly use my own photographs. Very rarely use somebody else's photograph, unless I have done a few YouTube videos taking some photographs from subscribers with their permission, and that's the most important thing. Is if you are going to post your pictures on social platforms and promote them and sell them and exhibit them, then if you are using somebody else's photo, you maybe need to think about getting permission. But other things to think about: composition and cropping the scene. As you can see here, I sort of zoomed in on the pub, the inn, the hotel down the bottom here. I sort of had this sort of a scene here, excluded this light cottage over on the right hand side in this big dark area, and then thinking about the light and shade, I deliberately made the rooftop of these right-hand buildings a lot lighter. Do you see, a lot lighter than they are, just to give me a little bit more contrast with the background trees. So thinking about those values, colors as well. Well, in the photograph we can see that we've got some nice cool blues here, dark green of the shadows it goes over the grass, bit of warmth in the stonework here, which I've tried to replicate in the painting. And then thinking about moving things around. So those two figures, yeah, let's have some figures. It's always great to have some people in the scene to add a bit more interest and a bit more scale and another dimension to the painting. So I brought these two, I brought them a little bit closer to me, just to balance out the composition. I think they would have been lost if I had them too far away. So there we are, a few ideas on painting from a photograph. Thanks very much for watching this video. As I say, if you do want to follow along on some of my projects, then visit my Patreon site for some painting projects and to get a critique from me. But I look forward to speaking to you on my next video. Thank you very much indeed.